The drowning ground. The sound you never get used to in the countryside is the silence. Not the quiet of the night, but the sudden, heavy silence. The moment when every cricket, every frog, every living thing in the humid dark holds its breath at once. That's how I knew something was terribly wrong with my grandmother, long before she spoke with a voice that was hers, but a hunger that was not. I had come home to our village in Kampong Tom a month earlier. Phnom Penh, with its endless noise and concrete heat, had finally worn me down. My mother had called, her voice tight with worry, telling me my grandmother, my Yi, was weakening. It was my duty, my honor, to be with her. So I packed a single bag, left the city behind, and returned to the wooden stilt house where the scent of my childhood still clung to the walls. The first few weeks were peaceful, a slow rhythm dictated by the sun and the coming monsoon. I would wake early to the sound of the neighbor's rooster, prepare borba for Yi, a simple rice porridge she could manage. I'd help her walk to the veranda where she would sit for hours, her eyes, clouded with age, gazing out over the green expanse of the rice paddies. Her hands, wrinkled and frail, would tremble as she held her cup of tea. She was my Yi. Gentle, quiet, a constant presence in my life. Then the rains came. It wasn't the gentle afternoon shower of the early season. This was the monsoon proper, a relentless, roaring beast that turned the dusty paths to mud rivers and the world outside our windows to a grey, shimmering curtain. The rain hammered on the corrugated tin roof of our stilt house, a frantic, deafening drumbeat that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. The air grew thick, so heavy with water you felt like you were breathing through a wet cloth. It was on the third night of this endless downpour that the silence fell. I was sitting on the floor, cleaning some vegetables for dinner by the light of a single flickering bulb. The steady, comforting chirp of the large toki gecko that lived on our wall was a familiar soundtrack to my evenings. It was a good omen, they said, a guardian of the house. Then it just stopped, mid-chirp. The silence that followed was absolute. The roar of the rain outside seemed to amplify it, pressing in on the small house. I froze, my knife hovering over a piece of morning glory. A cold prickle danced up my spine. I looked over at my grandmother. She was sitting on her woven mat in the corner, a place she always sat to pray before the small altar to our ancestors. Usually she would be slumped, her age a heavy weight on her small frame, but tonight her back was impossibly straight. Rigid, her head was tilted slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear in the rain. Every day I would light 3 sticks of jasmine incense for her on the altar. The sweet, cloying smoke was meant to honor the ancestors, to bring peace to the home. Tonight, that same scent felt different. It was thick, heavy, clinging to the humid air, not like a prayer, but like a shroud. I put the knife down. "Yi," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "are you all right?" She didn't move for a long moment. When she finally turned her head, the motion was too smooth, too fluid for her old, tired body. The dim light caught her eyes. They were still her eyes, cloudy and pale, but deep within them a light glinted. A cold, ancient amusement, a reflection of something that was not her. When she spoke, her voice was a near-perfect mimicry of its usual gentle rasp, but the cadence was wrong. The words were perfectly formed, without the slight waver of age I was so used to. "The water remembers," she said, her lips barely moving. "It remembers when all this was its kingdom." I just stared, my heart starting a frantic rhythm of its own, trying to compete with the rain on the roof. I didn't know what that meant. I told myself it was just the confusion of old age, a strange dream she was having while awake. I tried to smile, to break the chilling tension in the room. "Yi, what are you talking about? Come, let me help you lie down, you must be tired." I started to get up, but her gaze held me in place. That cold glint in her eyes sharpened. "Tired," she repeated, and a small, dry chuckle escaped her lips. It was the sound of dead leaves skittering across stone. I have not felt this awake in 100 years. Outside, the rain fell harder, and the gecko on the wall remained utterly, terrifyingly silent, as if it knew a far older predator was now in the room. The days that followed were a slow, creeping nightmare disguised as normality. In the morning, Yi would be herself again, frail, weak, asking for her borba with the same gentle voice. She wouldn't remember the strange things she'd said the night before. She would look at me with her usual loving gaze, and for a few hours I could almost convince myself I had imagined it all, that the rain and the isolation were playing tricks on my mind. But the changes were there, small at first, like cracks in a porcelain doll. She began to refuse the food I cooked for her. She would push the bowl of porridge away, saying she wasn't hungry. But later I would find things, a small pile of uncooked rice grains under her mat, a clump of damp soil from the potted herbs on the veranda with a tiny indentation where her mouth had been. One afternoon, my blood ran cold when I saw her, quick as a striking snake, snatch a large black beetle from the floorboards and put it in her mouth, chewing with a quiet, deliberate crunch. She saw me watching, and her face remained placid, but her eyes held that same ancient, knowing look. She swallowed, and then her expression softened back into the familiar, vacant smile of my grandmother. Her strength was returning, but it was an unnatural vitality. One day I found her standing on the veranda unaided. She who had not been able to cross the room without my arm for support was standing perfectly still, her hands gripping the wooden railing, staring out at the flooded fields. She wasn't looking at them. She was watching the water as if it were an old friend. The house itself began to feel wrong. A persistent dampness clung to everything, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The smell of the jasmine incense I lit every day grew fouler, a sweet rot that made my stomach turn. I started hearing things. In the constant drumming of the rain, I would catch whispers, fragments of words that sounded like they were being spoken from the bottom of a deep well. The animals in the village knew. Our neighbour's dog, a friendly creature that always ran to greet me, now stopped at the bottom of our stairs, whining and barking, its hackles raised, refusing to come any closer. The birds that used to nest in the eaves of our roof were gone. The house was an island of wrongness in a sea of life. One evening, desperate for an answer, I took a basket of mangoes to Loktar Chan, the oldest man in the village. He lived in a small house near the Wat, and people said he remembered stories that even the monks had forgotten. I found him weaving a fishing basket, his fingers gnarled but deft. I didn't tell him everything. I couldn't bring myself to say the words, to admit that I thought something was inside my grandmother. I just told him she was acting strangely, saying odd things about the water, and that I was worried. He stopped his work and looked at me, his eyes sharp and clear. He drew a long breath, smelling of tobacco and tea. "The monsoon is an old time, boy," he said, his voice raspy. "It wakes old things. The land around here is not like other land. It was once the bottom of a great lake, a sea even. When the heavy rains come, the ground remembers. It gets thirsty." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "There are spirits here, the Vinyan Tuklik, the spirits of the drowned ground. They are not ghosts of people like you and me. They are older. They are the memory of the water itself, a cold, hungry memory. They sleep in the dry earth, but the floods wake them. They are drawn to the fadding warmth of life, to the sick and the dying. They offer a gift, you see, a trade." "A trade?" I asked, my throat dry. "They drink the life, the spirit, the Khwan, and in its place they leave their own cold energy. It looks like life, it looks like strength, but it is just the water moving a puppet." He paused, and his next words chilled me to the bone. "There is a taboo, a rule my father taught me. Never bring things from the flooded ground into your home during the deep rain. No strangely shaped roots, no water-smoothed stones. They can carry the Vinyan with them. They are anchors for the thirsty things." My mind flashed back. A week before the rains had started, Yi had been sitting on the veranda. She had pointed with a trembling finger to the edge of the far paddy field, a low-lying area that was always the first to flood. She asked me to fetch her something. A small, dark river stone she had seen from a distance. She said its shape pleased her. I thought it was a harmless, whimsical request. I'd walked out into the mud, found the stone. It was oddly smooth, almost polished and cool to the touch, and brought it back to her. She had smiled, taken it in her hand, and had kept it with her ever since. I made my excuses to Loktar Chan and hurried back home, my heart pounding against my ribs. The rain was starting again, a light drizzle that promised a deluge later. I entered the house quietly. Yi was asleep on her mat, breathing softly. For a moment she looked so peaceful, so fragile. She looked like my grandmother. My hands shaking, I knelt beside her. I reached under the corner of her mat where she kept her few treasures. My fingers brushed against it, the stone. I pulled it out. It was dark grey, almost black, and felt unnaturally heavy. But what made me gasp and snatch my hand back was the feeling of it. In the warm, humid air of the house, the stone was freezing cold. And it was damp, covered in a slick, invisible film, as if it had just been pulled from the bottom of a river. I stood there holding the cold, wet stone and looked at the sleeping form of my grandmother. The thing wearing her skin was not asleep. I knew it. It was just waiting for the rain to fall harder, waiting for the night to deepen. And I knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the stone in my hand that it was aware I had finally discovered its secret. That night the sky broke open. It was a storm unlike any I had ever seen. The wind howled like a hungry animal, tearing at the roof and rattling the shutters. The rain didn't fall. It came in solid horizontal sheets, a wall of water that blurred the entire world. The lights flickered twice, then died, plunging us into absolute darkness, broken only by strobing flashes of lightning. In the sudden, terrifying silence between a crack of thunder and the return of the wind's shriek, I heard a sound from the corner of the room. A soft, wet, shifting sound. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with fear, and switched on its light. I aimed the beam at my grandmother's mat. She was not there. My light darted around the room, a frantic white circle in the oppressive dark. It caught on a shape near the door to the veranda. It was Yi, but she wasn't standing. She was crouched low to the floor, her limbs bent at strange, unnatural angles like a spider. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, and in that split second I saw her face. Her head was craned back, her mouth open in a silent gasp, and her eyes were wide, glowing with that same cold, internal light. She wasn't my grandmother anymore. She was just a vessel, a shell. "Rith," a voice whispered. It came from her, but it was layered, distorted, like many voices speaking at once from under deep water. It was the sound I had heard on the edge of the rain. I scrambled backwards, my back hitting the wall. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. The thing in my grandmother's body began to move towards me. It didn't walk. It flowed across the floor, its limbs pulling the frail body along with a horrifying liquid grace. The joints popped and cracked, but the thing seemed to feel no pain. "We are the ground you stand on," the layered voice whispered, getting closer. "We are the thirst that the sun can never quench. We were here before the trees, before the people, before the gods you pray to." The beam of my phone light trembled in my hand. "What do you want?" "We want to stay," it hissed, the sound of silt moving in a current. It was only a few feet from me now. I could smell it. Not the scent of my grandmother, not even the sweet rot of the incense. It was the smell of river mud, of decaying leaves, of cold, stagnant water. This one was fading, a light going out. We gave her life, we gave her strength, we are saving her. It was a monstrous perversion of love. It was trying to use my own feelings for Yi against me. I remembered what Loktar Chan had told me. He'd given me a small bundle of blessed white string and told me a prayer, a chant to bind a spirit to its anchor. My hand dove into my pocket, pulling out the string. The thing paused. The head of my grandmother tilted, a curious bird-like motion. "That trinket will not help you," it whispered, its voice filled with that ancient, cold amusement. "The faith of your new world is a flicker. We are the memory of the world itself." It lunged. I threw myself to the side, shouting the prayer, the Pali words clumsy and panicked on my tongue. The thing in Yi's body recoiled, not from the prayer, but from the blessed string in my hand. It let out a shriek, a horrible, gurgling sound like a drowning scream, and scrambled back. "You hurt the vessel," it hissed, its voice losing its coherence, becoming a chorus of watery whispers. "This body is precious, warm." It began to talk then, not to me, but through me. It spoke of things I could not possibly know. It described the birthmark on my father's back, a secret he kept hidden. It whispered the last words my grandfather had spoken on his deathbed, words he had said only to Yi. It was rifling through her memories, through my family's history, and throwing the pieces at me like stones. Each revelation was a violation, a defilement of everything sacred to me. The storm raged outside. The house groaned under the pressure of the wind. I could hear the floodwaters rising, lapping at the tops of the stilts beneath us. The world was shrinking, becoming just this one dark room, the storm and this ancient, thirsty thing wearing my grandmother's face. I held up the blessed string, my only shield, and kept chanting, my voice raw. I wasn't praying to defeat it. I was just praying to survive until morning. The first rays of dawn were grey and weak, filtering through the cracks in the shutters. The storm had passed. The wind was gone. All that remained was the sound of dripping water and the gentle lapping of the flood against the stilts. I was huddled in a corner, my body aching, my throat raw. The blessed string was still clutched in my hand. Across the room on her mat was my grandmother. She was asleep, curled on her side like a child. The soft morning light fell on her face, and it was just her face. Wrinkled, peaceful, beloved. A neighbour, Bong Chi, called my name from outside, his voice full of concern. He had come in his small boat to check on us. I managed to get to my feet and let him in. He saw the state I was in, the terror in my eyes, and helped me sit down, asking what had happened. I couldn't answer. I couldn't form the words. Then Yi stirred. She sat up slowly, blinking in the morning light. She looked at me and her eyes were clear. The cold glint was gone. "Rith, my boy," she said, her voice the familiar, weak rasp I knew so well. "Did you sleep? There was such a storm, I was so worried." She smiled. It was her smile, her real smile. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. It was over, the sun was out, the spirit was gone. Bong Chi helped me tidy the room, his presence a comforting shield of normality. As he was about to leave, he patted my shoulder. "You take good care of your Yi Aun, she is lucky to have you." I nodded, unable to speak. I walked him to the door and watched him get back in his boat, the floodwaters stretching out like a vast, brown lake. When I turned back, my grandmother was standing by the window. She was looking out at the water. Her back was straight, too straight. As I watched, a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. It was not her smile. Her eyes, catching the reflection of the brown water, held a familiar, cold, and ancient amusement. The air in the house suddenly felt heavy again, thick with the smell of damp earth and river mud. A smell that was coming from her. The storm had passed. The sun was out, but the water was still here. And the thing that had woken in the storm was not gone, it was just dormant, resting inside the woman I loved, biding its time. It hadn't been defeated, it had won. It had its warm vessel and it had its keeper. I live here now. I take care of her every day. I cook her bauber and I watch her eat beetles and dirt when she thinks I'm not looking. Some nights when the rain is soft, I hear her whispering to the darkness outside the window in a language that is not human. I am trapped on this drowning ground with a spirit of the ancient waters. And I know with a dread that has settled permanently in my soul that it's just waiting for the next big storm, waiting for her body to finally fail, waiting perhaps for a new, younger, stronger vessel to call home. So if you ever find yourself in the countryside when the monsoon comes, be careful. Do not listen to the whispers in the rain. And whatever you do, do not bring the river stones into your home. Some things are better left to drown.